Hey there, and welcome to another Vegas edition of Israel Explained. Today we're going to be talking about the Palestinian Authority. Now, this war is so complex that there are three fronts, all of which are incredibly important, and probably in the order of attention that they're getting right now, it's Gaza first, Hezbollah, Lebanon second, the West Bank third. But the West Bank may have the most long-term implications of the three of them. You could certainly make an argument for that. But because there's so much going on with this war, the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority are often forgotten. But the West Bank has been at war since um, back in 2022. By early 2023, I think it was pretty apparent that the third intifada was already taking place in the West Bank. There was just too much um, conflict going on there to call it anything but that. Every night, the IDF was going in to the major cities in the West Bank and fighting. During the war, already early in the war, early in 2023, late in 2022, the Israeli security establishment was saying that Israel needed to strengthen the Palestinian Authority so that it would be able to fight against terrorism, so it would be able to improve the lives of its citizens, and so it would be able to guarantee stability in the West Bank and not allow terrorist organizations to take over. Israel was concerned about groups like the Lion's Den and concerned about Hamas becoming more powerful in the West Bank. So this was already a big issue. There were conflicts within the government between Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir on the one hand, Gallant and the heads of the security services on the other hand. When the events of October 7th occurred, that sharpened those divides even further. Right after, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who ultimately has control over the purse strings, announced that Israel would no longer give out the tax revenues that it collects for the Palestinian Authority. Those revenues Israel is obligated to collect and deliver to the Palestinian Authority. A lot of the salaries that it pays, including to officials whose job it is to stop terrorism, a lot of the salaries are paid out of that money, which is one of their main sources of income. It's taken from Israel from the value added tax for goods that enter the Gaza Strip. So it comes as a tax from um, goods that are Palestinian goods. Ultimately, it's not Israeli money, it's Palestinian Authority money. At the time, Smotrich said, quote, the Palestinian Authority has proven again that it is a terror supporting organization. Therefore, the tax revenues will be used against Israel. In this reality, it is unthinkable that we continue transferring money like nothing happened, end quote. And that was quite popular at the time because of, the terrible events of October 7th. And the Israeli position at the time was, we're not going to give any money that's going to go to Gaza to pay salaries there because the officials there are working for Hamas, which makes sense. Israel was at the time willing to deliver money to the West Bank, but Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, linked the two. He said if Gaza's not getting the money, the West Bank will not get the money, which is kind of like playing chicken, because if the West Bank's not getting money, that means it's very difficult for them to remain in power. So he's sabotaging himself in order to get some political expediency here. Second issue that's linked to the stability of the Palestinian Authority that everyone's talking about right now in Israel is the issue of Palestinian laborers. It's an especially acute issue today because there was an attack in Ra'anana involving two um, illegal workers who were working at a car wash, residents of Hebron, and they killed an elderly lady and injured 18 people, at least last time I checked, showing once again the security threat that these laborers present, a genuine security threat, and a reason why a lot of people in Israel don't want them to return. Now, some background on this issue. Before the war, there were 150,000 Palestinians in the West Bank. and 18,500 from the Gaza Strip who had permits to enter Israel for work. There's also an unknown number of Palestinians who enter illegally every day. Before the war, it was more because there was less supervision, but there was still plenty of supervision then. Now it's less, but as we saw, two came in and managed to cause a serious terror attack. So this continues to be a serious issue. Nonetheless, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says that it's in Israel's interests to allow laborers in. He said, quote, Hamas is trying to link up Gaza with Judea and Samaria and to rile up the area. We must prevent this in every way and deal with the issues of laborers and money. This could harm our ability to achieve our war goals. Of course, bringing back workers right now is very unpopular and it presents a security risk. So, what does Gallant want to do? He's offered, along with main Israeli security services, pilot program where 5,000 laborers would be brought in every day. They would go through security and be brought directly back to the West Bank. Why is this so important to them? Why are they willing to do something that's so unpopular and presents risks? One security official told Ynet the following quote, it needs to be understood that the young Palestinian is sitting at home not working and is looking to earn money. This is where the Iranians and Hamas come in, giving money to whoever causes harm, or even just takes part in parades with weapons or identifies with the terror group. The moment he doesn't work and stays home, the temptation rises. If a decision isn't made about the workers, there is a concern of an intifada on the street, because it won't be an intifada of stones, but one of guns, and this will lead to an explosion. So, this is a particularly difficult issue regarding the laborers. I think much more difficult than the taxation issue, which is pretty cut and dry, that I think Israel should give it. We'll talk about why in a minute. There's a further complexity to all these issues. Israel wants the Palestinian Authority to reform. They want it to reform in various ways. Perhaps most importantly to Israel is the education system, which is teaching Palestinian children to hate Israel and, in some cases, trying to inspire them to become terrorists. There's the issue of payments given to the families of suicide bombers, what some people call pay to slay. And then there's also issues of corruption, which are very important as well for stability and the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority. Israel wants to use the money or can use the money and the laborers as leverage. But I think that's a mistake, even though I want the Palestinian Authority to reform for two reasons. One, if the Palestinian Authority doesn't survive this war, there's nothing to reform. Second, Israel already has a lot of leverage over the Palestinian Authority in the form of Gaza. Israel should take over Gaza, offer it to the Palestinian Authority under certain circumstances. The Palestinian Authority will probably say no. Israel should be willing to sit and wait. That is a lot of leverage to say, we are going to give you all of this territory for you to govern in exchange for reform. Then have the United States come in and agree with that. The Arab states come in and agree with that. That gives Israel a lot of leverage. So it doesn't need this um, as leverage. Another issue here is the United States. The Americans are very upset about the issue, particularly of the tax revenues, more than the laborers, at least so far. Blinken said at the time when Israel decided that it's not giving those tax funds, he said, quote, the Palestinian Authority is doing everything it can to keep security and stability in the West Bank. It is vastly undersourced. This is another aspect of the problem. Now, to be fair, when Blinken is saying that they're doing everything they can, that's probably not true. They are vastly undersourced. And if the Palestinian Authority had more money, they'd have more capacity to take away some of the burden that Israel has in preventing terrorism. For many years, up until recently, the Palestinian Authority did most of the heavy lifting when it came to policing terrorism in the big cities in the West Bank. It's only in the last year or so that that isn't happening. And it may be possible to bring that status quo back, although it would be difficult to do. So Biden was so concerned about this that his administration found what they thought was a solution. They proposed that Israel send the tax revenues to Norway for safekeeping until an arrangement can be found that will assuage Israel's concerns that these funds might reach Hamas. Netanyahu at first agreed, but under pressure from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, he backtracked on it. He told Biden on the phone back on December 28th that he doesn't trust the Norwegians and that the Palestinian Authority should just accept the partial transfer of funds. Biden was outraged because this had already been resolved, or he thought it had been resolved. He said this conversation is over, and he hung up. So that was over 2 weeks ago, and they haven't talked since. So not only is this issue undermining possible long-term stability in the West Bank, it's also undermining Israeli relations with the United States. And I don't think those $150 million are worth it. That's just me. In the long term, as far as Israeli strategy is concerned, Israel needs to realize there are only three options for the West Bank: either Israeli control, Hamas control, or Palestinian Authority control. It has to choose which one of those three it wants. Traditionally, the Israeli choice has been since the 1990s the Palestinian Authority. It doesn't want to deal with governing the Palestinian population in the West Bank day to day. It doesn't want to fund the Palestinian population day to day. And that's why it's preferred the PA. Hamas, I think we can all agree, is the worst possible option. Um, Israeli security services have been warning about the collapse of the PA for a long time. Right now, the warnings have reached more of a fever pitch because the war has increased the legitimacy of Hamas, increased the strength of Hamas, and since Israel cut off the funds, they also have less capacity to deal with things. So right now, the Palestinian Authority is in the worst shape that it's been. Some people say that it's doomed, and that may be true, but right now, Israel is making sure that it's being starved of the funds that it needs to survive. Israel may soon find itself fully occupying and supporting the Palestinian population, including all of the refugee camps in the West Bank, while doing basically the same thing in Gaza. This could create a nightmare scenario for Israel, where it brings it closer than ever to a one-state solution, because Israel finds itself controlling everyone from the river to the sea. That's unfamiliar. In a situation where there are as many Jews as Arabs under the same um, administration, bringing up a lot of issues of apartheid, a lot of issues of the continued survival of Israel as a Jewish state, and I don't think that's something Israel wants. Best case scenario, Israel managed to prevent those kind of things from happening, but goes bankrupt trying to support a wide occupation in Gaza and the West Bank, right? The amount of money it would take to run those areas, to keep them free or relatively free from terrorism would be staggering. And as long as Israel is not willing to discuss a Palestinian state, no other country is going to help Israel fund that. So if Israel continues to starve the Palestinian Authority of funds, it's going to bring on Israeli control or possibly Hamas control. And that's not something that anyone wants. And I think the um, tax funds are a much easier thing to give up on than the laborers. In the long term, the laborers appear to be too much of a security risk for Israel. Even if Israel does do a pilot program at this point, letting in a certain amount under certain security, I guess. But in the long term, the economy of the Palestinians needs to be reoriented elsewhere. And that's where Israel needs the help of the Arab states. They shouldn't be dependent on Israel because that leads to a codependent, unhealthy relationship that leads to terror attacks. So, best solution is separation towards a Palestinian state that has some capacity to govern itself. And what Israel does now will go a long way towards determining if that happens. Okay, so I have two questions today. Nayupi asks, should Israel pursue control of the Philadelphia corridor? Also, is Israel confident that Egypt can provide adequate security? So, the answer to that first part, should Israel pursue control of the Philadelphia corridor? Absolutely. That would be essential for any kind of attempt to keep the level of threat from Hamas in Gaza or from other terrorists in Gaza manageable. Israel must control the Philadelphia corridor. It could do it with Egypt, but it certainly can't trust Egypt to do it on its own. There's no way. I don't think Egypt cares enough, has the capacity to do it. There's corruption in the Egyptian government. I don't trust them to do it on their own. Israel and Egypt together, maybe. And because Israel needs Egypt's cooperation to some extent, it's trying not to annoy the Egyptians. But I think taking over Rafah and the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border, is worth whatever aggravation it will cause the Egyptians. To me, it's that important. I usually prefer diplomacy first, and in this case, we absolutely should be talking to the Egyptians about this, trying to reach a deal. But if push comes to shove, Israel has to do this. Aliyah Aloha asks, do you have any theories as to why what was revealed in the recent poll from Israel is happening? Speaking of the results of the Israeli poll you revealed on January 11th on Twitter. So I assume what you mean is that the left is a lot stronger than the right. That's the main thing that came out of that poll. Most polls since, aside from the ones on Channel 14, which many people think are biased towards the Likud. Um, yeah, I think the combination of three things at this point: the pursuit of the judicial reform, which many people felt was divisive and needless, swung a lot of voters from the center to the left. Then the bad handling of intelligence and the issues leading up to October 7th, and also the bad handling of the days right after October 7th, further weakened the right, and especially Netanyahu and Smotrich. Those two particularly took a hit. And I think right now, the sense that the war is being run without a clear end game, without being able to really achieve the goals that were promised, that probably hasn't hurt Netanyahu yet, at least not a lot, but that will probably hurt Netanyahu more once it becomes clearer, if it becomes clearer, and I think it will, that Israel's not achieving what it wants under this government. So all those things together have severely weakened the right wing. Um, because Benny Gantz, who's the main leader of the opposition right now, even though he's in the coalition, so that's kind of a weird situation, is more popular than Netanyahu right now. He's in the government, so he's not shooting out to some kind of massive lead because he's part of what's happening now too. So that's one thing that Netanyahu can hope for. But I think, Netanyahu's in a very, very bad position because he screwed up so much leading up to this. And it seems right now it'll be very difficult for him to recover. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep doing these every day. I'll definitely be here tomorrow to keep bringing you these Vegas editions of Israel Explained. In the meantime, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media on Patreon. Consider listening to my podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, and I will see you here again tomorrow.